Okay, hello, good morning everyone, and welcome to Leveling Up Your EVP. So this morning is about putting the muscle into helping you founders build. So we'll be digging into the first things early stage startups should be thinking about when creating an effective employee value proposition, which is EVP. So that you'll be equipped and prepared for when the time comes to grow your team and attract future investment. So if you feel you've made some mistakes in the past, or kind of want to be aware of common pitfalls to avoid from the start, I hope that you can take some actionable insights away this morning. We'll be recording the session, and we'll certainly be sharing it later on this week. Okay, so introducing our panelists, Sandy, Dan, and Ollie. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Ollie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Chris. So my name's Ollie. I'm the Senior Talent Manager here at Runa. We're a fintech scale-up. Essentially, we created the digital infrastructure for businesses to pay out to individuals anywhere, bypassing the primary network rails. I joined Runa back in 2021 when we just passed our Series A as employee number 40. We've since grown to 130, and as such, the talent team's grown. But so I manage everything across the tech and commercial hiring for the business, and supporting our growth to the next stage as well.
Thank you, Ollie. Hi, Dan.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Dan. I look after all of the fashion e-commerce work that Mindera does. So we work with global fashion brands around the world. There's about 250 people building websites for prestigious brands in the fashion space at Mindera. So I kind of support that work. My background's in engineering. I've had various kind of roles like CTO in the past, leading engineering teams. So really looking forward to chatting about employee value proposition and building engineering teams.
Good morning, Sandy.
To be here. So as it says on the label, I'm head of talent acquisition at Zoopla. So I've been at Zoopla for almost 7 years. I was obviously a small child when I joined there, but we've been through quite a journey since I joined nearly 7 years ago. So we've done a lot of work, a lot of scale up, a lot of growth, but also a huge amount of work on actually creating an EVP, because although we're an established business, we still didn't have that kind of recipe for our secret sauce. So we've gone through quite a lot of work on that, and I'm hoping that I can share some insights with you all on what we went through, which is good, bad, and sometimes ugly.
Thank you. And I'm Chris. I'm the Managing Director at Burn Sheehan. I've been in recruitment for nearly 18 years and work with lots of founders and lots of organizations in that startup and scale up space. So hopefully between us all, we can share some words of wisdom and advice. So this will be an interactive session. There will be an opportunity to ask questions via the chat function, share challenges, listen to some brilliant anecdotes and lessons from Sandy, Ollie, and Dan, who have all helped, as I've mentioned, build the EVP of different organizations at different stages of growth. There will be a few polls during the conversation, so if you'd like to interact, please do so. We do have a chat function, so if there are any questions that you'd like to ask the panel or feel comfortable sharing advice, please feel free to do that. Okay, so very quickly, as I mentioned, I'm the Managing Director at Burn Sheehan. So just if you don't know about Burn Sheehan, we're a London and Manchester-based technology recruitment agency. So we partner with startups and scale-ups at various stages of growth. So being involved in our buzz-generating event, community events, our roundtable discussions, or the Startup Diaries podcast are all examples of how we've helped founders stand out in a competitive market. So one of the hardest things about growing a business is building a team with the right people at the right time. Finding and convincing the right people to get on board with the business is often the very first challenge a startup faces. We all know the importance of setting your organization apart from your competitors. And of course, one of the most effective ways to determine and communicate your company's differentiators is through your employee value proposition. So what's an EVP and how do you build one that truly stands out? Well, simply what a CV is to a candidate, an EVP is to a company. Your EVP is the creative platform, the message, the visuals that communicates the what's in it for me of working at your organization. So it can cover culture, career frameworks, office environment, benefits, and compensation. An EVP defines who you are as an employer. It is a promise you make to your employees for the experience that they will have with you in return for their commitment and their contribution. So it encapsulates anything that you can expect from the company culture and the values right through to the reward and the recognition. An effective EVP links closely to your wider company's purpose and its mission. An employer uses an attractive EVP to win over talented candidates in the market. So some typical EVP challenges that you may have faced or you may have seen in other organizations. The first one, so we don't have a clear definition of our mission and values. So we're lacking the foundations to prioritize our people operations strategy and roadmap. So if you don't have an EVP in place before tackling other employee brand projects, your company is essentially driving in the dark in terms of your content strategy. You won't have a clear vision of where to go and what factors to emphasize as you describe job opportunities to candidates. B, we need to validate our understanding of key retention drivers to address retention issues in a data-backed way. So to develop an authentic EVP, it's important that your primary input comes from your employees across locations and levels, not just from leadership. Pulse check surveys can help understand your employees' drivers on a regular basis. Employees will be going to broadcast their real experiences on platforms like Glassdoor and Google, and this makes it super important that your EVP to emerge directly from your employee feedback. And C, we lack a clearly defined employer branding strategy. This could impact our market presence and ability to hire directly and organically. Uniqueness and clear points of difference in employer branding strategy can create an emotional attachment to your organization. This organization that are able to kind of showcase this and in their employer branding are able to communicate this internally, but also externally, like podcast shows, events, and through their website. Dan, Sandy, Ollie, do any of these resonate with you? Any challenges that you've seen with your current businesses or in the past?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for us, that the key thing was around, it's great to say, yeah, come and work here, we're brilliant, you know, this is a great place to be, etc., etc. But if you don't actually have something that you and the rest of the organization believe in, you're going to get found out because it's too flaky. You've got to have something that you've got contribution from the organization and your employees, something that everybody agrees is their mission, the reason they're doing their job every day, why they get up in the morning. And if you don't have that, it's really hard to try and pitch it into the market.
Thanks, Sandy.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think the second point on there about really understanding where your business are, it's a common mistake I've made. You often think, oh, we're this to candidates, we're this to our employees. And some of that will be true, but actually often there are challenges that you don't see, or you've kind of overly glorified aspects of your culture. And I think, yeah, having a really candid view of yourself is really helpful in making sure that you've got the right proposition for candidates and you're pitching it the right way.
And certainly from our standpoint, when we were initially defining the EVP, it was really to form the foundation of our employer branding strategy so that everything kind of can spin off that. And it was about how we're positioning ourselves to the market. Interestingly, since doing the EVP and launching that and then growing as an organization, and then start to resonate a little bit more with the point B into, well, how can we really live and breathe this within the organization? Because it is a commitment to your internal employees as well as that value proposition and your differentiator to people and candidates there in the market.
Thank you. Yeah, so reasons startups fail. In many cases, it's not your product market fit, it's not your total addressable market, it's not your USP, it's not your market traction or your lack of investment, it's your people. And Brent Hoagman, if you can see that on the slide, he recently shared 3 tips to founders when seeking angel investment. And I hope this conversation helps crystallize your thoughts around this. Okay, so first things first, evaluating your recruitment strategy. Sandy, what should you do first?
Yeah, I think this first point is really, really important. A lot of people think, well, this is who we are, this is what we're all about, and these are the types of people that we want to attract. can sometimes be very different to the reality of who the business is, what the day-to-day is like. To Dan and Ollie's points there, it's about really making sure that the perception and the reality are the same, and often that isn't the case. So you really need to double check. You know, you might aspire to be a company that engineers will want to come and work for and won't want to go anywhere else, but you might not be there yet. So it's really important that you have a balance of the messaging that you're sending. It's fine to be aspirational, but also you need to be open and honest about the reality and what it's going to take to get there.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, what's your why and how are you communicating this internally, externally? You know, when you're starting to hire at more volume, you should be having those kickoff meetings for every vacancy that not only touch on what you're looking for in a search and what your role is to an interview, but also crystallizing what the story is that you're telling. So, for example, you know, how do you speak about funding? What is your mission statement? This needs to be the same story from everybody, or it starts to fall flat. And then interviewing people within the business to get a true picture of what life looks like at your organization. Dan, any pointers around this?
Yeah, I think an important one from a tech perspective is to make sure that you're really honest with candidates about the stuff they're going to be working on. So, you know, a common thing would be, oh, we want to do AI, we want to do all this really interesting stuff because that's a buzzword. So you put all that in the job spec, and then the reality is when the engineer joins, they're going to be moving pixels around the page, that sort of thing. So I think it's okay to talk about your aspirations, but I think it's important to make sure that candidates know, right, these are the aspirations, so this is where we're going. It might be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months before we get there. This is the reality of the day-to-day. And yeah, being really clear with both your prospective candidates and your internal team about your direction of travel from a technology perspective is really important. Otherwise, you end up in this situation where you hire people and they bounce, and that's like the worst of everything, because you've gone to all the effort of finding them, you've gone to all the effort of onboarding them, and then if they bounce out again, that's like crazy expensive for businesses. So I think honesty up front, as the slide suggests, is really important.
Yeah.
And I think going through that process of interviewing people, surveying people, getting their feedback, coming up with a draft, and testing that on the individuals within the organisation, your employees, because it needs to be so transparent, and you need the buy-in from the people within the organisation. Otherwise, as Dan said, it's going to come unstuck during the interview process. You're going to end up hiring somebody that isn't going to be right for the organisation, which is the worst case in any situation, really. You'd rather hire nobody than hire the wrong person. And I think it really comes down to that transparency between really reflecting where you are now as an organisation and where you want to be and how you're going to get there, essentially, and how you're going to invest in people to get there as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So let's dig in then onto those five kind of building blocks to EVP. So the first one being culture. But yeah, you know, you need the best talent in the market for your business, not just the best talent in the market. So with growth comes the need to hire amazing people to allow you as founders to potentially step back from those certain activities in order to kind of take that more strategic position in the business. The vision for building out the team should be planned well in advance of the moment it's time to press the hiring button. It's about making sure your whole team, so your founders, your hiring managers, your interviewers, are fully on board for the really hard task of hiring people at a company that might not yet have a brand and is still growing. Company culture is one of the most decisive factors when it comes to picking a workplace, and building a strong team culture is crucial. It can be successfully transmitted through your company values and differentiates your EVP from your competitors. It can also help create a more diverse and successful workforce. So, multiple studies show that companies with strong company values have better financial performance, customer and employee satisfaction, and grow faster. So here are 5 of the most important reasons to set company values. So help the team make crucial decisions. Good values can help guide your employees through important decisions in the organization. Each project or activity should stand the values test. In other words, when asked, do we live by our values by making these actions, or avoiding these when you're making decisions? Aligning your team to the common goal. It's easier to communicate the bigger purpose with shared values. Teams without shared company values have inconsistent communication and can cause insecurities and often confusion. Improving motivation and psychological safety. So teams with explicit values and missions are more engaged and motivated. When you know what your values are, you know what your behavior is encouraged, then it's easier for you to understand what is required of you. You feel more secure and motivated to work towards common goals in this sort of environment. Communicate strong guiding principles to customers. So customers choose companies that share their values. Core values help educate customers and help them understand what your organization stands for. So in that case, they will associate themselves not just with your company, but with the higher purpose that you translate. So it's these customers who become much more loyal and will spread the word about you and your cause. The last one helps you hire the right people. So clear values make sure new people who have a good organizational fit. Core values plays an essential role in attracting, recruiting, and retaining talented professionals, but also fosters a racially inclusive work culture. Remote working makes it more likely that you'll have a distributed team. You'll hire employees overseas. So your core values are one of the more crucial methods to communicate your brand and attract them. Dan, what problems have you run into if you don't have a clear mission statement and core values?
Yeah, I think it's a really common problem where you have misaligned values in an organization. And I think if your engineers are trying to drive in one certain direction or one certain way of working, and you've got the rest of the business that are aligned to a different set of values, you'll just have conflict. And so I think values are really important to get right. They're something that will take a long time to put in place as well. So I've seen a lot of processes around bringing in values, and actually you can't do it quickly. You can't say, hey, I've had to think about it, here's our values, because actually it takes people a long time to get on board with them and really understand them. They will evolve and change, which I think is important, but a common mistake is to either try and put them in too quickly or try and change them too quickly, and then people get misaligned and wrong-footed, and that creates conflict, both within engineering teams, but also with engineering teams at the wider business. So I think this is it's a hard topic, but it's a really important one to get right.
Yeah, and Ollie, are values kind of only important to fill a few walls in an office?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the values for us is about getting people that are committed to those values and alignment to the mission, and then essentially enabling people, like then using that as a way to set people up for success. And I think for values for us, it's not just about hiring. As I say, it's the commitment internally. So we link that to our performance reviews biannually. You know, we ask people to demonstrate how they've demonstrated how they've done each of those values, and I think making them words or actions that people can perform makes it a lot more measurable. It enables you not only hire the right people, but as you say, create an environment for success where people know what the expectations are and what their behaviours, and ways of working should be.
Sandy, is it wrong if your core values change over time?
Totally. Sorry, not totally. I mean, no, absolutely. They should morph and change with the business. We've literally gone through this process recently. So we created our behaviours in 2018, 2019. So, look, seamless. Look at that. Yeah, this is basically, as Chris just asked, are they just things on the wall? This is what they used to be. So these were literally posters on our wall in our office, this is before we were acquired in 2018, so very much founder-led at the time. And these were what we were, not to be too coarse, but we were told this is what our culture was. We were told this is our ways of working. And we sort of, we did recognise some of it, but the business as a community had never been involved in the creation of these. So when the acquisition happened in 2018, obviously there's always change. When you start something up or you expand a business, there's a shift, there's a change in how people work and sometimes with the people that are in it. So we needed something that really brought people back together and made them recognise. We call ourselves Zoopligans. We are not ashamed of it at all. We love it. It came into force in the lockdown. But these are the behaviours that we created. We had 5 to start with. Be the Change was one of the new ones that we added as we started working through. So again, just to backtrack, we consulted with the business, we had workshops, we had feedback from everybody, because we wanted everyone to feel that these were authentic. That was a really key thing for us. Like Ollie said, we also now align these with our reviews. We use them in our interviews as well, because we want to hire people that resonate and understand what these mean. But also, the dream when you do something like this is that it becomes common language, that people just use it all the time. And we're very lucky then that has happened. People quote these all the time. And we actually have a wall of fame on Slack, which means anybody can nominate anybody at any time for any one of these. It could be someone you've worked with, it could be someone that you've seen do something. Anybody can do it, and it's really, really popular. We've got emojis now on Slack for all of these, and they've really, you know, taken it, they've become part of our DNA. And it's really important that when you look at that, if you do change, adapt them. We've adapted the wording on some of them, not the actual behaviour, because it's still fundamentally who we are. But as I say, we added one when it became really clear to us that DE&I was so important to the business, and we didn't have one that reflected that. So that's how we created Be the Change. But yeah, I can't emphasise enough how brilliant it is when you get input from people on these, because they believe them, and if they believe them, they're authentic when they talk about them, and then they're passionate when they're sharing it with external people.
Absolutely, thank you. Ollie, I was going to ask about Runa core values. I think I guess they're fairly recent. How do you drive kind of the authenticity of these values through your candidate assessments, and have you seen managers use them to measure impact and performance in their people?
Yeah, most definitely. So as I say, like our performance reviews, both after 6 months and end of the year, are each in relation to the values that we've got, and we clearly define what the expectations are or how you align to each of these values. And I think that we went through an exercise previously. We called it a values fit interview, for example, when really we take a step away from that and it's a values add. Right, it's people that are going to come to that interview. They're going to demonstrate the values that we've got, but add something more to what we've got there already. So, as Sandy was saying, from an internal standpoint, we've got to Runa recognise we're still working on what our kind of names are for the employees, as we only just rebranded. But any suggestions are welcome. But yeah, look, most definitely. And I think the important thing for us is really enabling people, giving the tools to people, giving people the right tools to be able to go above and beyond and demonstrate these values, you know, themselves, which then has a positive impact on the wider, you know, organization. So certainly, you know, as I say, it's giving people the tools for success and then letting them to kind of demonstrate their alignment for that. So certainly from a recognition standpoint, it's something that we're very, very hot on internally. And I think from an interviewing perspective, I think the worst impact that somebody would have if they're not aligned to the values. So I think for us, there's a massive emphasis on really digging deep into people's values at that point, because if hires don't work out, then this is probably somewhere that they would have fallen down.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we'll move on to the second building block of the EVP. So just before I go into that, just a reminder, everyone, if you do have any questions, please do use the chat function, and we'll try to answer those through the conversation. Okay, so work environment. So it's important to invest in differentiation and experiment with new ideas to make the workplace more appealing to employees. Okay, so bringing the opportunity to life. So so Dan, question for you here. We see a lot of organizations creating candidate packs and Notion pages and insight decks for prospective candidates and for the employees. But what's the benefit to this? And what would you expect to find in one? I think you've done one recently with Mindera.
Yeah, so Mindera is an interesting business because it, in theory, there's no management, right? So people don't have a line manager. There's no performance reviews. The organisation is very flat. So it's encouraged, people have to be very, very self-organising. So actually, by putting out a handbook about the culture and the ways of working, people are going in with their eyes open around this is what it's going to be like, and there are pros and cons to it as well. So it's not all like amazing, happy, wonderful organisation, because there's a lot of responsibility on individuals to take ownership and do stuff. So actually, by being clear with both potential candidates and current employees around like this is how we expect it to work, it's really helpful in keeping and shaping the culture and setting those expectations correctly. So if anyone's interested, Mindera's handbook's on its website, and it's an interesting read.
Yeah, and Ollie, you've Runa have got a Notion page. What have you seen the impact of that?
It's something that we send out, whether it's outreach to candidates, whether it's prior to interviews, and I think it's the transparency really for people. They can see what they're coming into. A lot of the time it can answer the questions for people before they need to ask them, sort of thing. And, you know, from an internal standpoint, it's also a useful tool for us because we can really see how much research people have done into the organization. You know, what did you think of the handbook? And I think interesting, we see our response rates and we see the engagement increase when people have taken it, and we've had a lot of positive feedback on it. I think the other thing is that as an organisation that we're founder-led, and we're incredibly transparent about not only the benefits and the perks and things like that, but also our ways of working. Like, we're a startup. We can be scrappy. We're not getting everything right, and we're going through that journey at the moment. And if you look on our handbook, that's quite clear, and that aligns to our values. So for us, it's a way of having a bit of a differentiator for other organisations when you haven't got a huge budget to throw into employer branding and things like that. You can use a tool like Notion really to your advantage, and we found it's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ollie. We've also seen an uptick in organisations making use of video when putting together candidate packs. So I guess it puts a voice to the faces. It brings the work environment to life. You're hearing from the employees themselves. Sandy, we can see it on the slides here. Tell us about the Zoopla digital culture book.
Yeah, so this actually came through as a result of the EVP work that we did. So we send it out to candidates once they are going through interview process right at the beginning. And to Ollie's point, I think it's really important that, you know, don't be too keen to take people on if they're not invested in working for you. I know sometimes when, you know, listen, hiring will always be, and always has been, full of drama. You've got to get everybody yesterday. You've got to get someone in. The team are fully stretched. If you don't get that head count in, it's all going to be a disaster. But it has to be the right person. And that person needs to be as invested in you and what you're doing as a business and a team as you want to be to that person. So if they don't really get the culture, or if they haven't read the culture book or looked on your website, or, you know, if you're just another application, it's fine to say, okay, look, that's great, you've definitely got the skills, but please can you take some time, because we want to hear about why you want to work here. We want to make sure we're the right company for you. So I think that's really important. And yeah, so our culture book really talks a bit about who we are. We also have a blog which is more specific to different areas. So we have, you know, you mentioned there about what's the work you're going to be doing and who will you be working with, and that blog, and we do videos on there as well, sort of talks about this is what we're doing now. We went through a time where we had to hire a lot of people and all the work they were doing was legacy. Now that is really unsexy to promote. Nobody wants to work on legacy tech, but we had to do that to get to where we wanted to be. So we were really open about it. And we still managed to get people that were interested in being part of fixing that problem so they could go on to create something else. But yeah, just really important that, you know, you put this work in, you invest in it, make sure that they're really interested in it, and don't be unafraid to ask them to take the time to do the research.
Same. Okay, so yeah, the remote versus hybrid versus in-person working. It's a topic obviously we've been speaking about a lot over the last 3 years. So in our latest technology market report, which was released last week, and I'll share the QR code in a later slide, so you can download it if you haven't seen it yet. But 67% of employees want some degree of in-person interaction each week. 2 days a week in person came out on top, and 12% said they preferred to be fully remote. So startups can offer more flexibility when it comes to working hours and ensuring the work-life balance compared to other established competitors that are more likely to have rigid policies with little room for flex. And remote working opens up the talent geography. Whilst remote working kind of options are still really attractive, we know that the majority of candidates are looking for some form of hybridity. So you could consider offering flexibility in terms of start times, working hours, or even shorter working weeks. There are many startups that are now trialing the 4-day working week or the 9-day working fortnight. And the 4-day working week actually came out in the top 5 most important employee benefits when we surveyed our network, with 39% asking for it, ranking it at number 5. So we've also seen an increase in companies offer a work anywhere in the world benefit, or a nomadic working, and companies are setting themselves up to allow workers to work overseas for a length of time, which is typically between 30 and 60 days a year. This is particularly attractive to any candidates with family outside of the UK, as they can visit without having to use all of their annual leave. And this is also a good way to show that you trust your team, and it's a great selling point. And if you're not able to offer remote first options or a flexible hybrid arrangement, it's really important to clearly outline and explain why this is the case. In our recent CTO health check, which is in our market report, it was clear that hybrid working increased mental wellness, inclusivity, work-life balance, and candidate attraction. Interestingly, according to the majority of CTOs that we surveyed, it did have a negative impact on company collaboration. Sandy, Zoopla introduced an everyday flex a while back, right? Tell us a bit more about that initiative.
Yeah, so it was fully in. So we're a tech company, and prior to lockdown, we were very inflexible with our working arrangements. We hardly had anybody remote. We didn't have any kind of, apart from part-time, obviously, but we didn't have any kind of hybrid or flexible working, which was challenging when we were trying to hire people into tech. After the pandemic, because of the performance of the business during lockdown, it really did change the mindset, particularly of our CEO, but also the exec. And so we call it everyday flex. We've got 3 types of contracts. So we have an office contract, a cooperage, that's the name of our office, cooperage contract. Now that means you have an office-based contract. We don't expect people to go to the office every day, but it's flexible. They go in when it's right for their job, for obvious reasons, when they want to go in and when they're needed. So when it's adding value, there's no fixed amount of days. So that can really vary depending on the role that you're in. Then we have, obviously we had sales teams, so we have field sales roles, which is slightly separate. And then we have fully remote. Now that means somebody is not based on a contract for the office. They can come in whenever they want to, but they can only claim travel and accommodation once a month. So they can come in one day, stay overnight, work the next day in the office and go home. The main restriction for that is HMRC and what's taxable. So it isn't Zoopla being a bit tight, but we have to be really clear about these because we have had some confusion. And the flex time, what we call is core working hours. We try to encourage meetings between 10 and 4. Most people can start earlier, finish earlier. It's quite grown up. So really, we trust people to do it as long as productivity and people are happy.
Thank you, Sandy. And Ollie, in the time you've been at Runa, have you seen the company policy around hybrid working evolve? And do prospective candidates ask about working policies during an application stage?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved. I mean, when I joined, as I say, we were about 40 people and we had an office that seated 8. And we were very much a remote organisation. Coming out of COVID, obviously you needed to be mindful of people's personal circumstances, either young families or, relatives that might have vulnerabilities. So we were initially kind of fully remote, but the office was open for people to come into the office. Since we've grown as a business, we've moved office and we've most recently launched a kind of an office rota, really. So we're never going to be a remote organisation. As much as it can make things easier to hire, specifically engineers, all of our engineers, really see the value of being in the office and being able to plan with one another and do strategy sessions, things like that. So the rota that we've got is basically 2 fixed days a month and 2 flex days. So those 2 fixed days would be with your team, and then you organise accordingly. So it would be planning sessions. It will be, and they might tie in a social. You might have, organise to have lunch together. And then on the 2 fixed days, you could either do that one either side. You could do either side of the fixed day, and the other flex day can be elsewhere. So it's creating an environment for people to make the decisions they want when they need to be in. But there's those 2 days. Look, I think before I heard about the different contracts at Zoopla, I'd say you're never going to please everyone, and there's always going to be people that want something different. But I think
it
as an organisation,
Ollie, don't worry, it's not still, I promise you.
I think as an organisation that you have to commit to these things and you have to make the decision. I think which is how it differs to EVP and things like that is that if you start to get 100, well, in our case, 130 different opinions, you're never going to land on one. So you need to make a decision that's right for the organisation. Interestingly, we've just done a pulse survey on the office rota, and I think about 60% think it's the optimal way of working. So we haven't got it perfect.
Yeah.
We probably won't get it perfect, but the things that we're doing now is working well for us. So yeah, I'm sure, you know, it will constantly evolve, but you know, as a scale up, we're constantly iterating and changing, and you know, we will get it right at some point.
Yeah.
Can I just add, sorry, a really quick thing to that? Sorry, Chris. One of the discussions, just that Ollie's made me think of it, is that there was a time a couple of years ago where we were making the decisions on the type of contract because of what the candidate wanted. And what we've had to do is change that mindset around what is best for the business and that team, which means that you could automatically just go to fully remote. You know, you think about the role and you think about the benefit of having those interactions face to face as opposed to remote. And I think that's when you start to get a balance, but managers have to be involved in that decision too.
And I think just to add to that again, when we talk about like letting candidates know, we have it on our application page. Are you happy to commit to being in the office on average once a week or twice or 4 times a month? So then you're reducing getting to the end of the process and having those difficult conversations because you've got it documented early on. So you know that people are committing to that at the point of application, and it's something that you need to commit to as an organisation, whatever it is, you know, you choose. I think committing to it for the long run, and it ties in with the values, I think, is the core principle.
Yeah, and Dan, you live in Belfast, but I can see you're in the office today. So Mindera must have a pretty attractive working policy.
Yeah, so Mindera's got people spread out all over the world, work with clients all over the world. So it's very much a high trust culture. So we essentially say, look, you can manage your own time how needed. I think recently we have put in place some stuff like keep in touch days. So similar to what the other guys have mentioned, actually, it's really helpful to sync up with people, and it's helpful to be a bit organised around that. So it will go in on different days and then just miss each other like ships in the night. So we've started putting in place some days where there'd be the default day where we get together in London, or the default day where we get together in Leicester, which is helping us keep in touch, and then people just manage their own time around that. I think for us and our culture, that works quite well. But you know, I've worked in lots of different businesses, and it's about finding what's right, the right balance for the business and the candidates.
Absolutely, thank you. That's really interesting. Okay, so moving on to career frameworks. So while employers may believe that competitive salaries are the main reason for employee turnover, talented individuals usually don't leave solely due to compensation. Instead, a lack of learning and growth opportunities for career advancement tends to be the primary factor that leads to disengagement. So for employees, a clear progression framework should be a roadmap of how they can advance within your company and what's expected at each stage of their development. It should help them understand where their role fits in the company structure and how their contributions can make an impact. For hiring managers, it will enable you to identify high potential employees and provide them with the necessary support and opportunities they need to succeed. So according to our community survey, for the second year in a row, limited career progression was the top reason for employees disengaging with their current employer. Building a clear progression framework isn't too hard when broken down. Start by agreeing levels and titles and defining the skills, competencies and expectations for each level. Build a training plan and establish a promotion criteria, and make sure this is communicated and worked towards with employees. Remember to have an extension plan for any overachievers who exceed all expectations and fly through the plan. Monitor and evaluate progress with employees and make sure it's something that is reviewed and evolves over time. Don't let it become stale. The key is to empower team members at all levels, providing them with the direction and guardrails, while also giving them enough space to make their own decisions and take ownership of them. This allows team members to feel like they're contributing as leaders themselves, rather than just executing steps from a cookbook. This fosters a culture of ownership, accountability, and continuous learning, which is essential for enabling hypergrowth in an organization. Dan, how costly can it be to the business when you lose great people? And what methods can you put in place to potentially reduce that risk?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I think it's, you know, in a CTO or engineering leadership role, it's one of your biggest concerns because it takes such a long time. You go out to market, you spend however long it is finding the candidate. Let's say you're lucky and it's a month, maybe you're unlucky, it's 3 months. Then they've got to work their notice period. So you've got a gap for, again, 1 month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months if you're unlucky. So you're already 4 or 5 months without somebody in role. Then they join and they've got to get up to speed. And for senior roles coming into a large code base, there might be tens of thousands of lines of code they've got to get their head around, multiple systems, multiple architectures. If they're good, they might get up to speed in a few weeks with the overall picture. Of course, they'll do stuff in the short term, but while they're getting up to speed, they're slowing everyone else down, asking questions, getting help, all the rest of it. So actually, if you look at the cost to a business of that, before you even take into account recruitment costs, that sort of thing, it's really, really expensive to be losing good people. So it's much better to increase retention than pretty much anything else. And in terms of how to do that, it is tricky. I think lack of progression, like you've got here, is a big reason people move on. I think there's probably 3 subdivisions of that. People want progression of skills. That's learning new technical skills, being able to better themselves as a software engineer. People want progression of title. That's moving from engineer to senior engineer. And they want progression of salary. That's moving from whatever 60 grand to 70 grand. And I think it's making sure you've got in place fair processes for how to navigate that with candidates. And a lot of the time, people do just want to get better and want to further themselves and help the company more. But equally, if you put in place too simplistic a framework, and I've done this myself, the classic one will be, well, our senior engineers mentor more junior engineers. That could be a common one.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you get a mid-level engineer who says, oh yeah, I had a mentoring session with Dave the other day. I'm a senior now. Can I have a new pay rise and title? And that wasn't quite what was intended with the career frameworks. I think they're a really helpful tool, but you've got to use them carefully. You've got to land them carefully. You've got to really understand what bits you're doing well. Are you doing salary progression well, but skills progression badly? Or are you doing title progression well, but salary progression badly? Understanding that for a business is really important.
Yeah. And Sandy, moving on to the next slide. So your the career framework, the Zoopla example. Do you want to talk us through that? I think we've got 3 slides.
Yeah, there's 3 slides. I'll just sort of do an overview of them. I thought it just might be interesting for people to see. I think one of the reasons for, again, like your survey, some of the most of the feedback we got was about personal development and career development. So we wanted to, and you're right, career frameworks can be really daunting when you start to think about it. So it's why I wanted to put this sort of building block in. So there's sort of 3 areas that we looked at. So people management, discipline, competencies, and our behaviours. So again, the behaviours are coming back in and are involved in this kind of process as well. But really, it was answering the question that we got from people was that I don't know how I'm going to progress or develop here. I might be doing great work. I love it. I want to commit to staying with the business, but I don't want to do the same thing every single day. But progression to people, sometimes they think if they're not managing people, they're not developing, right? But we wanted to have 2 routes. So we have an IC, like an independent contributor route, and then we have another route for people who can progress where they're managing people or teams or projects or what have you. But the point about the mastery levels was around having a really sort of, I think it was Ollie that said this, or Dan, it's got to be fair. It needs to be, really objective measurement, so that when you're looking at, when you're going through reviews and you're looking at where people are at a certain part in their job, what kind of mastery levels are they demonstrating? Because you also need to make sure that you're going to set people up for success. So if you've got somebody who's, delivering at practice level, but really wants to go straight into a really senior role where they need to lead or evangelize, you've got to put something in place around their development and their progression to get them to that point. And we also use these in interviews. So people that come in, we measure their mastery levels at interview. We measure our own employees' mastery levels during the review process. And also, and then there's the competency framework, which sits alongside that. So you're doing the competency measurement, and then you adhere that to the mastery levels. Does that make sense? I hope so. But really, it's the whole point of a career framework is, what do we want this engineering function to look like in the future? What does great look like for us? And what are the people that work in that? What do they do? What levels do we have? What function do they deliver? And all of that fits into that headline about, you know, how do we outline what we're going to look like? What are the stages for us to get there? And how do we take our people on that journey? And it's a lot of information with a bit of a headline, but the career framework isn't just about going from A to B. It's very much about the growth of that person, the growth of the team and the function to ultimately get to where you will look back and say, that's what we wanted to do 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago.
And bringing your behaviours back in as well in the framework.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're all included in the framework.
And Sandy touched on a point there, which I think is really, really important and easy to get wrong. I've got it wrong a lot, which is pushing technical engineers into management roles. That's a really common mistake to watch out for, because people too easily think that to be a manager is the next level of my career. And almost 9 times out of 10, a really, really good software engineer's skill set is orthogonal to management, which is all people-centric. Not always, sometimes you get some people who are great at both, but a really common mistake I've made in the past is to have a career progression that pushes technical people into management. I think it's really important to have both the management track and the individual contribution track.
Right, mentoring opportunities. So yeah, there are several ways to encourage professional development, so training budgets, for example, but a really powerful way is for a mentorship program. So having a mentorship program for your employees can be a really powerful tool for achieving their career goals and drastically reducing their feeling of going stale as their tenure with you grows. Particularly for the future leadership cohort, pairing them up with a good mentor, i.e. someone who's been there, done that, can provide guidance, support and insight to help them navigate the complexities of career progression and people leadership. At Bone Sheehan, we have our own voluntary future leadership program. We connect people from within our network and through one-to-one mentoring sessions, whether that be in person or online. There's a QR code on the screen if anyone wanted a bit more information or wanted to kind of connect and or even wanted to apply as a mentee or a mentor. Sandy, you have a reverse mentoring scheme called Z Connect. How successful has this been? How do you measure it?
It isn't called Z Connect, but it doesn't matter. So the reverse mentoring scheme, we introduced that. We've never really had a formal mentoring program at Zoopla since I've been here. And when we went out to the business to ask them, would you be interested in being a mentor or a mentee, etc., a lot of the more sort of entry-level, junior-level people were saying, we don't ever see these kinds of opportunities for us, and we think it would be really important. So we decided to switch it up and do a reverse mentoring. So we had everyone from the exec team to C-2 put their hand up and be a reverse mentor on the program. Sorry, it's really complicated to say. And then we got so much from it. It was almost as well, and people actually felt like they had a voice and that people were listening to that voice. There were a couple of suggestions that were made to our CEO when he did his first session that we actually looked at from a benefits perspective, and we actually changed. Now, he would never possibly have had that insight if he hadn't been in that situation. I mean, that's like a perfect story, but it's not just about, having those amazing wins. It's also just about people feeling they've got a contribution to make and that people are listening to them. And it also makes them understand that most of the people that they think have just walked into a CTO, CPO, whatever role, haven't just walked into that. They have gone through a huge amount of levels and change and progression and development. And so it is possible, and it makes things a bit more realistic for them. And then we've just started to do a more traditional mentoring program this year, which is it's working out really well so far.
Have you renamed the Z Connect, Sandy?
No, sorry. Z Connect is what we do for our new starters every quarter.
Oh, okay. My mistake. I apologise.
No, it's my fault. I should have told you about it. It doesn't matter. We'll call it Z Connect now.
Let's call it, yeah, fine. Okay, moving on to benefits. So Yeah, reward and recognition is a big part of many companies' retention strategies, but many define them as perks as free lunch, unlimited vacation, or a nice gym in the office. Employee benefits can certainly be part of your EVP, but it should be more focused on the bigger value that employees get from the experience of working at your company. It's not a one-size-fits-all, as people's priorities are very personal, so it's important to take a holistic approach. A supportive package should provide growth opportunities, tap into the need for social connection, community meaning and purpose, as well as providing material offerings like flexible working arrangements and financial benefits. Tiered packages can offer upgrades and additional rewards based on employees' tenure, and that can also demonstrate a commitment to loyalty and retention. Rising costs have prompted lots of companies to rethink traditional financial packages like bonuses, and instead many have seen kind of offering more flexibility around annual leave to support employees beyond their base salary. We've also seen a shift in companies offering family planning support benefits, from extended parental leave packages to IVF, fertility, and adoption support. According to our network, financial benefits still rank at the top of the list for most people, but perks that promote better work-life balance, like increased annual leave or a 4-day work week, have made it into the top 5 now. So supporting and encouraging employee-run networks can really tap into the need for providing a sense of connection and community internally. It can also help promote a culture of inclusion as well. Shares and equity offering are a very important part of a benefit for a startup, but candidates' understanding of its current and future value before joining is often very low, mostly due to the inability to effectively communicate how tangible this benefit is before they join. So for your equity offering to be a valuable tool for attraction, you need to explain and show the candidate exactly how much the equity could be worth. Companies that best utilize the equity as part of an offer tell a story about the potential value that an offer represents. You can tell a compelling story by sharing the vision and the roadmap of a business alongside any real-world exits, IPOs, or future acquisition plans. It can be difficult for a candidate to trust the value of equity, especially if only one exit scenario is given. Detailing 3 different exit scenarios and underachieved target growth, achieved target growth, or overachieved target growth can allow the candidate to see a realistic range of what the equity could be worth. So if you have a founder that has been through successful exits, IPOs, or acquisitions, really share these stories. Pay and flexibility are offerings that are easy for rivals to imitate and can have the least enduring impact on retention. Companies should focus on what the workers need to thrive along the long term, balancing material offerings with opportunities to grow and feeling more connected to the purpose. Ollie, Sandy, do any of these kind of resonate? And yeah, have your teams found it difficult to really sell bonuses or shares as part of a financial package?
So I think on the share option side, look, again, just if I haven't said it enough already, we're a Series B business, right? We've just got our Series B funding. So I'd like to think that our benefits are pretty good. We have a standard pension scheme, but we have things like private healthcare. We have things like wellbeing days to support people on top of their annual holiday and things like that. But on the share option side, I think it resonates as we were talking about the Notion pages, right? If people aren't bought into that, or they haven't done the research, much the same as like if they don't know or they don't buy into the shares or the value of those shares and how you talk about them honestly and openly, you know, and what the plan of the business is, if they don't see that as valuable, are they ready to join a startup? You know, because we've found a lot of people might come from big tech or larger organizations that have got, you know, big pensions and things like that. You come into a startup organization aligned to the mission and know that if you make it work, you've got a slice of the pie, right? You're going to be rewarded for that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be expecting a bonus at the end of the year. It means that you're going to be putting in some hard graft over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And when we are successful, we say internally, we win together as an organization. So really giving that openly and transparently, obviously you can forecast what our exit plan might be or what the value of those shares are. You can't commit to that. So you need people to know that they're coming into this eyes wide open and they're working hard to achieve the outcome that we're all here for, really.
Yeah, I guess, Sandy, you really got to sell the benefits to get the take up, right?
You so have, and I think people now expect a certain standard, which, you know, in order to be competitive, it isn't. And I know that financial ones are always, especially at the moment, goodness, always going to be at the top of everyone's priority. But if there is support for sort of significant life experiences, that also is becoming much more sought after than it used to be. I think Ollie's right about the share option piece. It's really difficult because you want to pitch it because it could be life changing, right? But there's no guarantees with this stuff. And if you ask the business, what can I share? We've had these legal documents that have been sent. I don't make any sense whatsoever, and they're going to put everybody off. They're not going to make them. Read the first sentence, think, no, I'm not interested in that. So it's really important to sell the opportunity and the contribution, I think, but before you get to what could be, you know, for me, an alpaca farm in the middle of nowhere, you know, you really do have to support people because you're going to ask an awful lot of them through that process. So how are we going to, you know, it's a give and take thing. We're going to ask you to do a huge amount for us, but we're going to support you with X, Y, and Z. Well-being is becoming really, really important now for people, that kind of balance. The mental health piece. So we look at our benefits every year. The core ones stay, but we always look to add to those things too. But you do have to pitch them,
Yeah, and Ollie, I guess like Sandy, you've got a talent team there, and what sorts of benefits are you finding that Gen Z are looking for in businesses now?
I think in some respects, the flexibility, as Sandy said earlier, we have kind of core hours, but we trust people we measure on outcomes as opposed to the hours that you're working. So I think that's a key thing. Interestingly, we found in some instances that the share options, people don't buy into it, as much, but I think that really comes down to how you're talking about the importance of it. Again, the well-being and the learning and development are huge things. So we've invested in a LMS. It's a part of our people team's OKRs for Q2 and Q3 to be rolling that out. So we've got the learning management system. We have £1,500 a year that we can dedicate towards individuals' learning and development. And it's really about how they're going to upskill themselves. So I think they're the key things. Really, is about the well-being. Private medical insurance and the L&D budget are core things that really help us kind of pull people in. And look, the share options as well. I mean, I could talk about it for hours on the share option side. I think, in most cases, it's something that really has that hook for people to join. Yeah.
And do you measure the uptake in these things? So that, Super, for example, have got a cycle to work scheme. Is it something that the percentage of employees that take that on? And if it was a certain percentage, would you kind of maybe reposition a benefit?
Yeah, we do. I mean, for example, interest-free loans. Nobody takes the season ticket loan anymore because nobody wants to go to the office 5 days a week. So we adapted. It's still there, but we adapted it to other things. So we've got interest-free loans for other things, like you mentioned IVF. We also have it for transition surgery. We also have it for home improvements, which of course we should have because we're Zoopla. So yeah, so we do measure them and we change them depending on the uptake, or we just flex them a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we've done the same on that as well. Like it goes out as part of our kind of quarterly ENPS survey, like how are the benefits working for you. So on an annual basis, the team have reviewed it, and off the back of that, last year we introduced a new shared parental leave. And other benefits, like a new health insurance provider that gives us better cover. So yeah, it's about constantly speaking internally, finding out what's working. People.
100%. Okay, and compensation. So according to our latest market report and findings from Hired.com, compensation is the most decisive factor when prospective candidates are deciding on their future employer. So we've got some stats there for everyone. So how can startups compete with scale-ups and enterprise organizations outside of salary? If your salary is non-negotiable, focus on skill set and less on future business value and leadership experience. Consider your options for setting up equity offerings for founding employees as part of the total package, as we've mentioned. Dan, getting onto that third point about industry salary benchmarking, how do you make the most of that? And particularly when you might notice as potentially a founder of a bootstrap startup that you'd notice that you're maybe not paying the upper end of a salary bracket.
Yeah, I think it's firstly understanding what you're paying benchmarks against the industry. So looking at both formal benchmarking stuff that you might pay for, but also looking at what the candidate's going to be looking at. So they're going to be looking at pay scale, they're going to be looking at IT jobs watch, they're going to be looking at Glassdoor, they're going to be looking at LinkedIn. So, how do you stack up against that? If you're below the average, then what are the things that you're adding into your proposition that make up the difference? It could be flexibility, it could be learning opportunities, it could be giving somebody a shot at a more senior role than they perhaps qualified for. There's a whole range of stuff you can do, particularly in the startup space. If you've got people who have got really, really good attitude and a really good aptitude to learn, then actually you can give them a shot at a bigger role that's perhaps you're not paying what that role would pay in the industry, but they haven't got all those skills. So you can sometimes find some nice balances in that space. So that can be helpful. But I think step one, understand where you are. Step two, how do you make up the difference in the proposition so that you're not looking for an amazing person, but paying an average wage because you're a long time looking then.
Yeah. And Sandy, how often would you audit, your salaries against the market?
Oh goodness, how to answer this question? So it's a constant battle, right? We have never paid top end in the market, and that's always been really challenging for us. But just to back up on Dan's points, when we do go, one of the hardest things when you've got a business when your business is going for a few years, you'll have people that have come in at the beginning on a certain level, and then you'll be hiring people 3, 4 years, 2 years even later, and the market would have gone up. So you're bringing people in on a higher salary. And what's really, really important is to try and level those out with your, long-term employees. And a lot of the time, this can be in any business, people that have been there the longest time, often there's a gap between, and they're the same skill set as the people you're bringing in, right? If not better, because they've got knowledge of the business, but they might be underpaid. And if you don't look at that regularly, so we've been spending the last 2.5 years looking at this because we do have some disparages from acquisitions and various other bits and pieces. But if you don't do it soon, you'll get to this point where the gap is so big, you just can't afford to level it out because it would cost so much money. But every time we go to market with a role, we do a benchmark for that salary. It's important to know that there is a bracket for these things and make sure you're going out at the right level. Because it's always easy to look at, well, I'm a senior software engineer, so I want X amount because that's what's the highest in the market. But it might not be right for that role. It could be, we have 2 levels for each. So for our mid and for our senior. And there's different brackets of salary for that. So really important to do it regularly. Make sure that you don't have a big gap between your existing employees and the new ones that you bring in, so that you don't get to a point where you're going to lose them because you just can't afford to pay them market rate.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. And just on the last point, we're talking about putting everything into practice, which is a big topic. Important things employees look for in a company. I wanted to ask, I guess, all of you really, how often do you how often do you speak about this internally? And are there, in your opinion, other factors that employees look for in a company?
I think for me, the only one that's missing from this list is, and it's probably about, might be within the culture, but it's diversity, equity and inclusion. So not just what does your footprint in that area look like now, but what are you doing in those spaces? That's a really key thing for us. We get that a lot.
Yeah.
I think the other, it might sit within kind of culture, but the mission of the business is so often we'll be having the conversation around, this person is super bought into the organization. People want to be working towards the mission statement. And for us, we really leverage the fact that we're building the kind of digital financial infrastructure, which is something that's very, very new in the space that we're in, and getting people that are looking for an opportunity to make an impact. And I think that's something that's particularly important within a startup or scale up, is the opportunity not only to learn new skills, but to utilize those new skills and make an impact on the organization to go from there to there.
Yeah, I mean, and when we're talking to candidates that come to a recruitment agency like Burn Sheehan, two things that they're after: they want choice from us, they want and they want us to offer businesses that they can relate to, where they see a meaning and purpose in an organisation. For us, it's always been the two key things that candidates have looked for. Okay, yeah.
Those top three were really important. I think when you're a startup, bit you can control without a massive impact is the company culture and the opportunity to learn new skills. So I think for new business founders, actually, if you haven't got the compensation or you haven't got one aspect of the employee value proposition, push the culture bit and make sure that that's right, and push the opportunity to learn, and that they're two kind of good angles to help make up a deficit in, say, package.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so before the team is yet to balloon, it's a great opportunity to get into the practice of opening up your audiences. If you can successfully create all these channels, then you are hyper in tune with where are the good people at. Now, this doesn't matter if it's a referral, if they were inbound, if you sourced them, but once you see them, use the momentum to your advantage and get them through. A lot of early stage startups will over-index on one particular channel of these three. So it could be hacking your way through outbounds. It could be asking the team to bring in direct referrals, or it could be working with one or two agencies to build the team out. All of these have their trade-offs, so from taking you away from the business, a lack of diverse hires, or a really expensive hiring strategy. So early tech companies tend not to lean into marketing spend until they have that established product market fit. So they become evangelists internally, and then in the channels where they live, they begin to create that excitement. And essentially, as we've said, during the course of this conversation, why is this a special place to work? So covering the inbound recruitment side, posting jobs for startups without a brand that wasn't developed yet used to be almost next to useless when kind of up against a bigger tech business. It was a candidate market and people were flocking to the bigger brand names. Now, postings that speak to the quality of the founders, the momentum of your business, it's really getting some interesting inbound activity. So an employer's market, when the opportunity for hiring great talent is there, you should be leaning into great inbound channels like this. Job specs. So yes, they shouldn't be a shopping list of skills. So don't laundry list your item, your tech items on your job ad. Unicorns don't exist. So really break down those non-negotiables. A really key kind of study here, or multiple studies have proven that women apply at a lower rate versus men when they do not meet every listed requirement. So if your job ad lists excessive skills, you skew the application pool to male.
I think just at this point, Chris, what we found, and it's I guess a misconception in some interest, is that the job spec isn't your job advert, right? Your job spec is there. It's a formal document. It's there to be used as a performance management. It can be used for progression, all things like that. So in terms of a job specification, this is an internal HR document that's being written up. Now, from our standpoint, the job specification, then we build off that for the job advert, right? So that's then when you can start to make it a bit more sexy. This is how you kind of make it so that people want to apply, and you're using different platforms to enable it to then attract people of different backgrounds and experiences, and really widening the kind of the pool on that side.
Yeah, Ollie, that's a fantastic segue to our next slide. So this is a Zoopla example of a job spec. Quite clearly, there's more of a focus on mental health and neurodiversity, aligning with ethos and mission. Sandy, Zoopla have put a lot of thought into how they write their job specs. Has it increased your inbound activity and questions that candidates are asking during the application process?
Funny enough, what Ollie was just saying, we're in the process of rewriting our JDs and also our job ads, purely for that reason of we want a more diverse talent pool. And I think we've just decided that our two key areas from a DE&I strategy perspective for this year and next year is to balance our gender, so female people that identify as female and male, and then also we need more ethnic minorities, because that's another area that we're sort of lacking in from a diversity perspective. So this is an old job spec that we use for an apprenticeship program, but it basically is calling out the fact that we wanted to increase our gender balance. There isn't anything wrong with saying these things, as long as you make sure that you do caveat that by, you know, we accept anybody from all backgrounds, etc. But to your point about job specs and having that shopping list, you know, it's a well-known fact that women will apply to a job only if they have about 70% of the criteria, whereas a man will apply if they have only 30%. So if you want to diversify your pipeline and then therefore your employees, you need to look at those job specs and also look at who's on the interview panel to make sure that those biases have been trained out of them, or at least they recognise them so they know not to use them.
Yeah. And Sandy, are you still part of the Text You Can charity initiative?
Yeah, absolutely.
Diverse talent.
Yeah, very proud to say I'm one of the founders of Text You Can. And one of the things that, you know, we're pushing Pathways, it's about encouraging the future pipeline. So we can't fix it now. We need to think about those young people that are coming up and looking at what career they could take. And so few of them understand what the breadth of careers available in technology, and the fact that everything is going to be tech-based from a career perspective in the next probably 10 years, which is quite scary. So if they don't understand it, then they're not going to be able to, you know, think about going into it. So it's a really important part, and we're now strategic partners at Zoopla as well, because just making sure it's not just about gender diversity, of course, but it's really important that we make sure that we're working with those sort of young people to encourage them to come in and fill the jobs that we're struggling to fill now.
Yeah.
I could talk about that to hours, so don't ask me any more about it.
Moving on to outbound recruitment. So yeah, establishing a rhythm of going outbound and getting your company in front of the talent community is vital for sustainable long-term hiring strategies. The best candidates are employed in many cases, so start the process of getting your name out there early. Some examples of, I guess, building your team's personal brands are having your engineering team start a tech blog to help amplify the tech brand to the community. Ollie, you know, what kind of company do whilst they're looking for attention and looking at their brand piece and their storytelling piece? What are other things that they can do to go outbound?
For us, spotlight the people internally. Spotlight your high performers, spotlight your bar raisers, put the people out there that are really defining your business at the moment. You know, whether that's talking at events, whether that's blogs, whether, you know, we've just started a 90 seconds with series where we're, as I say, spotlighting some of the people within the organizations. Again, like there's things that you can do which are paid, but again, as a startup scale up, we don't have that budget to align to that. So using all the different social channels, little things like, again, as a scale up, posting on angel lists or, you know, startup jobs and things like that. Putting yourself in as many different places as possible is really going to enable you to become more visible, and you're driving that traffic then to your website, you're driving that traffic to your people internally, and really indexing on that point of the blogs and things like that. Statistically, I think when people are posting from their own LinkedIn accounts, it gets about 50% more traction on social platforms to your website. So really encouraging that, utilizing all of the free channels that you've got to be able to do it, and then eventually kind of scaling that up a little bit more.
Yeah, and like you say, Ollie, you know, applying for awards or competitions or nominating people in your teams for reward recognition awards, it can validate the brand as well, and it can also make it more attractive for the fundraising piece too.
And really highlighting that as well. Like for us, when we had our Series B last year, we were raising in a time which was incredibly difficult. So we were shouting about that. We were making sure that people knew that we did something that many companies couldn't do at that point, and it becomes your differentiator at the same time.
Yeah, and Dan, a question for you, because, you know, techies notoriously are not big on self-promotions. How do you convince an engineer of its importance, you know, if they're not that big on that self-promotion piece?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting one, because we had a similar discussion internally. A lot of the people at Mindera aren't big on self-promotion and therefore don't naturally want to be going out and shouting about it. I think one of the things we've been trying to do is help them understand why it's important. So actually, by, say, writing a blog post, you're helping other people learn. That's good. That's not about you promoting yourself. That's about sharing your knowledge with others. That's about helping the business go forward. So I think if you can frame things the right way and turn your internal people into champions for your business, that's really powerful. But it's something that you need to go and think about, work out how do you get your internal team to be those champions? How do you get them comfortable with it? And how do you frame it in a way that they feel good about writing blog posts, going to events, reaching out to their networks, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess without the feeling that it's a vanity metric.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So building partnerships and brand ambassadors. So yeah, many founders are going to be too busy focusing on trying to sell the product, and most will struggle to find the time to recruit people, as it's taking time away from the business and building it. So building trusted relationships with the people you choose to be your ambassadors in the market, or partners who are responsible for identifying and engaging with exceptional talent for your business. So this could be your internal talent partner, this could be your people partner, this could be a recruitment agency that you choose to engage with. Now, recruitment agencies can take a huge weight off your shoulders and give precious time back to your hiring managers, as long as you can successfully build a two-way partnership. Build relationships with one or two strong agency partners. You know, the mistake the founders can make is having relationships, but very weak ones with about 8 different recruitment agencies. These agencies aren't going to lead into helping you hire if you're not going to lean into the relationship. When there is a handful of roles to fill, pick your partners. They'll get to know how you work, and you'll start to find the success. But measure their ability to represent your brand. Ask what they measure internally and externally. This is a question for everyone, really, because I know that you've all used agencies in the past. But how do you measure their success, and what advice do you have for the room when deciding when is the best time to consider an agency partnership as you grow? And if you are conducting a bit of a beauty parade, what are the distinguishing features that you would look for in a recruitment agency?
I mean, firstly, I think you probably need somebody internally to manage that for a founder, right? Because the recruitment process itself and managing all of these different channels is such a huge responsibility. So whether that's an internal partner or whether it's somebody that you've employed directly. But secondly, I think it's having a platform, an ATS, that can centralize everything into one place, so it makes it a lot more manageable. In terms of the expectations from an agency standpoint, I think when you are selecting your agencies, you hold them accountable and that you make them commit to certain deliverables, because I think that's where things can come unstuck. So for us, we'd have a kickoff meeting, and then every 2 weeks or every week we'd have a catch up. We'd see where they're working against the KPIs that have been set, work against the commitments, and then reviewing that regularly. So I think it's having that regular touch points, which I think for a founder, given all of the other things, other plates that will be spinning across the business, I think that's the importance of having an expert in the room to be that person to manage that, make those judgments, and take that weight away from you. But for me, it's around the success metrics and the accountability that you set out from the get-go.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think when looking at agencies, a big part of it is understanding, right, here are 10 agencies. What are their specialisms in terms of location? What are their specialisms in terms of software engineering skills? Most agencies will have a go at any role you throw their way, but actually some are London specific with Java. If that's what their specialism is, then and you've got a role in London that needs Java, and that's a great fit. So I think that's kind of your first port of call. Then a mistake that's easy to make, and I've certainly made this one in the past, is to push too hard on rates. So if an agency's got a rate of X and you say, right, well, actually, I'm going to negotiate 5% off, you might negotiate 5% off, but then they'll have other businesses that are paying more, and therefore you'll get the best candidates last. So I think, yes, you need to do some rates negotiation, but if you push too hard with some agencies, it can be tricky. So I think find an agency that meets your skill set, work out what their rates are and whether you can pay them or not, and avoid pushing too hard on their standard rates. Otherwise, you'll get the candidates last out of everyone else who's going for people. So I think those would be kind of some of the things I think about when looking at agencies.
Thanks, Dan. Sandy, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just a couple of points on that. I think to Ollie's point, it's really important, whether you've got a talent acquisition team or not, you need one person, ideally, to own that relationship. Also, really do not, founders in particular and managers, hiring managers, can get tempted by hundreds of different agency emails. You need to have a kind of process around that. So if you're going to choose your partner, and it should be a partner, 1 or 2 maximum, because otherwise, if you're not working with them in partnership, they should be an extension of your talent acquisition team, your hiring function, whatever you want to call it, because you're trusting these people who don't work for you to sell your business, pitch your business, be an ambassador for you in the marketplace. Now, that can be really brilliant experience, or it can be really damaging if you don't choose the right person. You have to give them the right amount of information. If you don't tell them what you want them to say or give them information about the business, they can't pitch it properly. So, you know, to Chris's point, the partnership thing is absolutely key, but you've got to invest in it. Don't ask them to invest and produce miracles if not a two-way street, because it just won't work. But yeah, be really cautious about, you know, if you're working, have a PSL, even if it's only 2 agencies, have something robust around that so people can't get tempted by the carrot dangling emails that come through, because it just diffuses everything. It makes the process messy, and most importantly, it makes the candidate experience poor, which is what you don't want to happen.
100%.
I think just to add to Sandy's point there, the best agencies won't be the ones peppering your inbox every day. It will be, so my advice would be, go to a trusted partner that's come through a referral that you had taken, you know, had a good reference from, or you know somebody that's used them, they've given you a great experience. I think that's a real key thing there.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, just to add to that as well, you want an agency that can help you with your inbound strategy and your outbound strategy. They can advise you on your inbound without actually writing those job specs, but they can give you advice and insights that might build and help build those out. And they might be the platform for an event or a podcast that can help you go out and amplify that brand out there. So really important that you consider how they can be useful to all the channels that you build out to, you know, to establish that audience. So moving on to effective candidate experience. Make sure you have a good onboarding process, and this can start with getting out vital information from candidates whilst an offer is being shared, creating a pre-onboarding process that begins the date the candidate formally accepts the offer, ship the employment contract ASAP. Involve the hiring manager, the team, the HR and talent team, the people services team, eradicate any unnecessary delays, agree strict SLAs with your people services team around PO approval and contract generation. Ensure that your business establishes regular touch points throughout the chosen candidate's notice period, and ensure you're open the lines of communication throughout. It's about building the excitement before day one. Invite them to meet the team, include them in any company socials, involve them in work collaboration meetings as well as offsites and virtual coffees, agree on the hardware and discuss the home office setup, send some creative swag packages that can really build that emotional attachment to your brand, and consider giving early access to the company intranet so they can start to consume the relevant content. Send any digital assets that might help them prepare for the work that they've been employed to do. I think Ollie mentioned that you might have some of these on your Notion page, but tech blogs, GitHub accounts, Stack Overflow accounts, your Notion pages, your company structures, to really show what your team are doing. Also, thinking about the candidate experience. Who's representing your brand at interview, and what interview training do you have in place? So training the people in your business who are going to be representing you and in interview is vital. They have the potential to destroy your brand or miss out on a gem in a 45-minute interview. So discuss the values that you're hiring against and coach on how you can bring these out at interview. Ollie, you've recently implemented interview training for your hiring managers. You have a brilliant blog, and we'll share that after this. How did you go about doing that?
Well, so for us, we doubled in size from throughout the course of kind of 2012, and what we realized is we hired great people. Those people were going through the process and sitting in their roles and becoming interviewers. But we realized that we hadn't actually conducted that training, and what we wanted to do was kind of increase the confidence of hiring decisions. We wanted to make sure that the candidate experience was great and there was consistency and removing any bias on that. It's a great opportunity for people to learn and develop, and a lot of people see it as a career skill. So we conducted a survey. So we really understood what people needed and the value that they were going to get from that. We created an 8-module interview training deck, and then in sub teams, we then delivered that in person where possible, or remotely. And then it was about learning after that as well. So then when we surveyed people, we saw that 80% of people agreed or strongly agreed that they felt more confident in their interview capability. But it's consistently having those feedback loops. We realized that we should have indexed more on one thing than another. So we'll then be adding that into our LMS system to continue to work off that, really. So it was about putting the deck together, delivering it in person, having that open Q&A, creating a discussion within that group we felt was the best, was the people that came out with the best kind of experience within that group. So it's also something that we can kind of continue to monitor through our CMPS, through our EMPS, and kind of continue to kind of iterate on that, really. But that's kind of the process that we went through, understanding what people wanted, what they needed, and then acting on that.
Yeah, and you know, talking about that second point about D&I, look, we've spoken about this during the course of the conversation, and Sandy, you mentioned that, you know, that is key and critical to what employees are looking for, which means that you've got to consider that during the application process, especially with, you know, if you are, you know, a diverse workforce are applying, you need to make sure your methods of testing are inclusive. Now, being flexible when necessary, it could be parents, it could be people with neurodiversities or any other impediments that they may need some adaptations for their interview. So you must make sure that you do consider that, and acknowledging the potential for unconscious bias in your written job descriptions, for example, which we've mentioned as well, and appreciating that adjustments maybe need to ensure the equity and inclusiveness. We don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to flick on to the next page, which is pretty much the last page, which is what should your first tech hires look for. So early stage hiring is about not always looking for those people who are just technically adept, but are applying to your company because they believe in the mission, they admire the team, and there is a technical challenge that is core to what they want to do. Said it before, but once you spot them, get them through this process as quickly as you can, or as efficiently as you can. But think thoughtfully about the people you're trying to bring in. There is a massive opportunity for startups that are smaller and scrappier in their nature to execute on a cool and fast interview process. Big companies try to do this, but it is impossible. It's impossible for bigger companies to run faster than small companies when to get somebody through that interview process. To really take advantage of that. Make sure that your key stakeholders in your interview panel understand that speed is critical. The best companies are making brilliant hires in 5 to 10 days once that candidate CV has been shared. It's never too early to understand what your philosophy is on compensation for your first tech hires. If you're aiming to pay the top of the market on equity or middle of the market on cash, because this will have an overall effect on your proposition. So a couple of questions to the group before we finish. Dan, what are the benefits of hiring cross-functional developers in early, and how do you compete for them?
Yeah, I think when you're small as a startup, you've not got unlimited money, you're going to be raising more money. Therefore, having cross-functional developers gives you more flexibility. Work doesn't flow evenly between back-end development, front-end development, systems integration, etc. So having a developer who can work across all of those different areas is going to be super valuable. I think finding them can be tricky. Yeah, getting out there, working out what you want, working out what's essential and what's not is really important.
Dan, do you still have a couple of minutes for one or two more questions?
Yeah, just a little bit longer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How important is speed versus finding the right person?
So I think speed. I mean, you touched on it there. It is without a doubt the most important aspect. Speed of interview process, and then obviously for the startup, there's a trade-off between speed of hiring somebody versus what you want to achieve in the long run. So startups are cash constrained. They do want to get out there and get the product to market before somebody else does. If you wait for the perfect candidate, it could be 6 months before you find somebody. Equally, if you hire too soon, you might end up churning through people, which is going to slow you down in the long run. So depending on your business, you need to actively think, where am I setting that dial in terms of how quickly do I need somebody versus do I want to find the right person? Maybe you'll get lucky and find the right person quickly, and various people can help you with that. But I think being really mindful of that trade-off is important.
Yeah. And there'll be lots of founders in the room that potentially don't have a CTO yet, and will be starting to consider bringing in their first CTO. What should they consider, when they go to market looking for one?
Yeah, I think depending on how mature your business is, you're either going to want somebody who's hands-on, or you're going to want somebody who can guide a team. It's often you can find somebody in the middle ground as well if you're in that sort of startup scale-up space. So I think identifying what your needs are, being realistic about it, and so many businesses go through this process where they hire a hands-on CTO, they grow, the team scales. That hands-on CTO can't step away from detail, can't stop being hands-on, and therefore they end up changing them out and getting somebody who can step away. Occasionally you can find somebody who can do both, but more often than not, there's that transition. So I think at an early stage, think about, is there somebody who can give you some part-time advice on architecture, whether that's a partner, whether that's an advisor. That's often going to be a very cheap and effective way of getting the architecture and strategy of the technology right, while someone hands-on, it builds that first Scrum team and starts delivering your products. And then as you grow, you can make the decision around, does this person grow in, or do you hire somebody above them?
Yeah, and so Sandy and Ollie, did you want to add to that?
I think when you were talking about kind of the speed versus finding the right person, I think as a startup you're limited in like the historic data that you've got. But I think what you want to do is use the data you have to make a reasonable assumption, so you can forecast ahead. If you know that you're going to need somebody at X point, what was your time to hire, your time to fill? How can you then draw that into your process so that you're not being so reactive with recruitment that speed becomes a huge issue? If you give yourself the time, know that budget obviously ties into this as well, but I think if you can forecast ahead, you know what you want, you agree that internally and give yourself the time to do it, to work towards that end date, then I think that you then can balance that speed and finding the right person a lot better. But yeah, that would be my view on kind of the speed.
Yeah. My last question really on this is, I've worked with a lot of founders who have really glamorized big name logos for incoming candidates. They must have worked for Google, they must have worked for Meta, or similar businesses of that such. A lot of the time, those people aren't right for those small startups. So how should founders think about the type of talent that's right? And should they care about the logos? And how do you avoid getting caught up in that game?
I think it goes back to your very first point at the start of this, was about checking your ego and making sure that you understand who is right for you. It may be that in 2 years, 18 months, whatever it may be, somebody from Meta might be the perfect fit for you. But right at the beginning, first of all, what have you got to offer somebody if they're in a career trajectory at somewhere like Google or whatever it may be? How are you going to manage to match that? But it's really important to look at what is the job that needs to be done right now, as opposed to what you're aspiring to be in the future. Get the foundations right and get the right people in for that role, and then you can progress those people. And maybe you don't need to hire from Meta because you've hired them at the right time and you develop them as the business has grown. It's difficult because it's a sparkly thing that's shining and everyone thinks that's what they want, but it isn't necessarily what is right for that business.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more from our standpoint. I think it's something that is always kind of coming across the desk, like, we want these people. But I think on Sandy's point and on Dan's is that you want a cross-functional developer at the beginning, right? And I couldn't say in every situation, but a lot of people that have come from big tech will be siloed within a particular team. And you need people who are going to be working cross-functionally across the organization. They've got that breadth of experience, but I think the important for us is having that T-shaped engineer and then balancing that skill set within different areas. So I think on Sandy's point again, know exactly what you want, why you want it, and what they're going to be contributing for. If you know that, you're telling that to the candidate, you'll get that buy-in, and then everybody can kind of work off that basis. But I think it's about knowing what you need when you need it, how you're going to get it, sort of thing.
Absolutely. Dan, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Only that I think 10 years ago it was true that engineers at Google and those companies were amazing. I think that's not the case anymore. They've gone from low thousands of engineers to tens of thousands of engineers. And now they're at the point where they can make 1,000 engineers redundant, and it doesn't make a significant difference to their business. And that, I think you can't rely on the logo as a measure of quality of an engineering. It used to be able to do that, whereas now actually a lot of these big companies have hired quite low down skills.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, well, look, that's it for today's conversation. I don't think there are any questions from the chat function, but if there are, obviously, I'm sure the panelists are available for a LinkedIn connection request or to answer any questions offline. Again, we'll share the LinkedIn profiles on that side. But yeah, thanks very much to my panelists for taking the time out of your day to speak about the importance of EVP. And thanks to everyone for joining. We will share slides and we'll share content later this week. And as I say, we'll share the market report and anything that we've mentioned. And yeah, if anyone would like to connect with the panelists, yeah, absolutely sure that everyone will do that. So thank you, Wally, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Sandy.
Thank you very much.